David Spence is well known to Calgary television viewers, and even if you're not a television viewer, he's our local meteorologist with CTV television and CTV News Calgary. He comes from Winnipeg, and he came to Calgary in 1981, and he's been here ever since, except during a couple of years in 1985-87, which is a bit of a mystery, I'm told. He's won the Calgary Herald Reader's Choice Award several years in a row now. He volunteers actively with a program called Weather in the Classroom program, where he goes out to schools and talks to students about the weather and meteorology in general. He did his meteorology education at Mississippi State University. And David, it's a pleasure to have you here tonight, and please welcome our speaker, David Spence. You don't have slides?
I don't have slides.
Fine, that's good.
Old-fashioned speech on paper.
Excellent, that'll work too.
Hi. I think before I start, let me ask you guys a question. All of you here have or have had prostate cancer? Okay. Okay. Does everybody remember the date they had their surgery? Yeah. Everybody has dates they remember. My birthday is July 11th. My wife's birthday is August 18th. That's a really important one to remember. Almost as important as my wedding day, August 22nd. Remember that? January 6th, that was the day my father passed away. December 7th was the day my mother passed away. June 18th, the day my twins were born. December 5th, the day my oldest son was born. And December 3rd was the day I got the call. Remember getting the call? I got the call on December 3rd, and the following 26th of February 2012 was the day I had not conventional surgery, but I had brachytherapy. My story is probably much the same as many of you. I have a fantastic family doctor. He tests for everything. I go there with a hangnail, and I go to the lab for a battery of tests to find out what's wrong. I have a mole. The mole is removed. It's sent for a biopsy. Bronchitis. He'll send me for a bronchitis test if I have a sniffle. Very fortunate to have a doctor who does this. Sure, it may cost the healthcare system some money to test me for every little thing, but he tested me. He took PSA tests for me back when I was in my 30s. Which was pretty rare. And you know on those forms that you take to the lab, there's a little check in there, and if they request a PSA, they have to have a reason. And there's a little check in there. It says something like suspicious DRE, suspicious digital exam. And he would always check that, even though he was lying. I never really had a suspicious digital exam, ever. But I did have the digital exam, and I started having them pretty young, and I keep telling my younger friends who are just getting into it, or my coworkers, that it's only uncomfortable the first time. That's also a lie, but whatever. So not only did he do the exam, he would send me for the PSA, he would lie on the form, and I would get the PSA, and for years and years and years, everything was fine. About 12 years of PSAs, it was okay. But he noticed a little bit of a change in the fall of 2012. And before I talk about that, I just want to say that it's a good thing that he did all those tests. And I'm really, really, really angry at all these studies that come out and they say no more routine PSA testing. That really makes me angry, because PSA testing and screening saved my life. At least I think they did. So in the fall of 2012, he told me that he noticed my PSA was rising a little bit. The numbers weren't sky high. It went from 2 point something to 4 point something, but that was enough to arouse his suspicion, and he sent me to a specialist. And I saw the specialist, Dr. Metcalf. Does anybody here know Dr. Metcalf? Seen him? He's a pretty good guy. And he's a surgeon, and he looked at my PSAs, and he too was suspicious. He also gave me that uncomfortable little test, and he didn't find anything there either. This was on Halloween Day, 2012, October 31st. It was kind of neat. You go into his office, and his receptionist is dressed up in a Halloween costume. It kind of lightens the mood. And you know that every guy sitting in that waiting room is either sick or is about to find out that he's sick. So it was really kind of nice for them to be all dressed up in their Halloween costumes. So he did the exams, and he looked at the PSA numbers, and he thought maybe I should go for a biopsy. So I went for the biopsy. Same building, top floor of the Parkade, Rocky View Hospital. You guys all done this? Don't have to talk too much about it, because you probably don't want to remember it. In the waiting room, volunteer comes and talks to you. And my wife was with me at the time, and he tried to reassure me, both of us, that even if the biopsy does show cancer, that it's highly treatable. I found out that it was. He also told us that 70% of men who go in for that biopsy test negative. They come out of it, they don't have cancer. That kind of stuck in my mind, because I was one of the 30% who got the other diagnosis, who did have cancer. This volunteer who came and talked to me, he had brachytherapy, and he talked to me a little bit about that and just what it was and how it worked. And I'm glad he did, because the information that he gave helped me make my decision later on. I got to tell you, and I'll talk about brachytherapy in a while, the most uncomfortable part of this whole ordeal was that biopsy. Wow, that was like, ugh. Brachytherapy was easy. You count when you have the biopsy. Did you guys count? They take 12 samples, and you count every single one that they take. And you know, for me, I don't know if this happened to you, and I hope it didn't, but you know how you go to the dentist and they put that freezing in your jaw, and then they let you sit there for 5 minutes, 5-10 minutes, and then they come back and they poke the drill in, and they do that thing, and you don't feel a thing because the freezing has taken effect? This guy didn't wait the 5 or 10 minutes. He put the freezing in there, and that first little thing that he pulled out, that hurt because the freezing hadn't set in. So I had to say, can you just hold off a little bit? And the rest of them were not too bad. There was no pain for the rest of them. That first one was super painful. But the freezing had set in, and I had the other samples, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you count and you count. But even though there was no pain, it was still really uncomfortable. You couldn't wait for this thing to be over. But it was. And it went well. I was told that I was a pretty good patient. I didn't really bleed very much. But man, do you feel woozy. And I found out why they insist that you have somebody drive you home. Because on the way home, my wife was driving down Deerfoot Trail. I live in the far south end of the city. So I had to go from Rocky View toward Deerfoot and then all the way south. And if I looked up and I looked out the window, whoa, was it woozy. I had to stare at the floor all the way back. I also occasionally suffer from vertigo, and this wooziness was not unlike that. It was very similar. Your head starts spinning, and wow. But car ride was over and things started to get better. I had to lie down on the couch for a few hours. It really did affect me. So the biopsy's done, and I wait. And I wait, and I wait, and I wait, and I wait, and I wait. And the phone does not ring, and I'm very happy about that. Because they usually only call when it's bad news. 10 o'clock in the morning, December 3rd, the phone rings. Got caller ID. It's Dr. Metcalf's name. Uh-oh. And I get the call. And yeah, he told me what he told all you guys, that you have prostate cancer. And would I go see him later on in the week and bring my wife? So he tried to explain the cancer over the phone, but I'm sure that when you got that phone call, you were in shock, as was I. He went on and on and on. Nothing registered in here. It was just, what? What is he saying? So we went later on to meet with him. But when I got that call that day, I was by myself. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. My wife had gone to work. My kids have gone to school. I didn't have anybody to talk to. And I did not break down in the conventional way. I didn't cry. I didn't weep. I didn't do anything like that. I trembled. And I trembled for about 2 full hours. Now, I had to go to work in the afternoon. And I was just hoping this shaking would end, and it eventually did. But it was the scariest thing that had ever happened to me, because at that point, I didn't know much about prostate cancer. I didn't know if I was going to go in for chemotherapy. I didn't know if I was going to lose weight. I didn't know if I was going to lose my hair. And I work at a job where, you know, you got to kind of look fairly good. I'm not the most attractive person in the world, but at least I'm presentable. And I didn't know if I was risking my job at that point, if something was going to happen to that either. So I just didn't know. So I didn't phone my wife at work because I didn't want to give her that kind of news when she's at work. So I just went to my own job later on in the afternoon. I didn't tell anybody when I got to work either. I was kind of quiet, wasn't my usual self, and nobody seemed to pick up on the fact that there was something wrong, so that was good. They didn't know, and they wouldn't know for 2.5 years. I kept it to myself. I kept it a secret, and I'll tell you why a little bit later. So we kept the appointment on December 6th. My wife and I went to see Dr. Metcalf, and he explained that the biopsy had a rather unusual diagnosis. There wasn't really a single lumpy tumor there, which explains why they couldn't feel anything on the digital exam. What they found was there were tiny cancer cells spread throughout the prostate, and they hadn't really gathered into a single tumor. But the entire organ was just full of cancer cells. I was diagnosed a Gleason 7, 3+4, which is intermediate risk. It's not the worst diagnosis, it's not the best. Active surveillance wasn't an option. I had to be treated, and I had to be treated fairly soon, especially because the cells had spread throughout the prostate. Dr. Metcalf is a surgeon, and you always hear that surgeons recommend surgery. This is what I do, this is how I make my money, you're coming in for surgery. And he talked about that, but he was the one who recommended I investigate brachytherapy, the treatment that I had heard about earlier from that volunteer. And he made a referral, so I went to see a brachytherapist. Now my first thought was towards surgery. Get the cancer out of there, get it done, it's over with. But then Dr. Metcalf started talking about side effects. I didn't really want to have to go through with that, and I'm sorry for those who have and who've had a rough time with it. So I took the referral to the brachytherapist. It has far fewer side effects, and he thought I was an ideal candidate for it and that I should investigate it. So I went to see Dr. Hussain, Dr. Siraj Hussain, who spoke here 2 months ago. His office at the Holy Cross, he was my doctor. He did my brachytherapy. And we are so lucky to have this guy in our city. I mean, this is a world-class brachytherapist. He has pioneered techniques that are used now elsewhere in the world. He is an amazing man, and I was just grateful to have him personally take my case. He told me again what brachytherapy was, and this time I was a little bit more able to absorb it and really get a feel for what it was versus surgery, and he sold me on it. He offered me time. He said, you know, you and your wife, you go home, talk about it, tell us what you want to do, surgery or brachytherapy. And we said, no, we're not going home to discuss it. We're deciding right here and right now, we'll do the brachytherapy. And so he booked me in for May of 2013, 5-month wait. That's 5 months of anxiety, for sure. But for me, the wait was shortened because another patient who was scheduled for brachytherapy had changed his mind. Canceled his February 26th procedure, and it was offered to me, and I took it, and the wait ended up only being 2 months. Do you guys know what brachytherapy is? Should I explain a little bit of what it is? Okay. It's radiation sort of from the inside out. What they do is, first of all, you go in for a CAT scan, and they take an image of your prostate. And they look at it, they make sure it's big enough for brachytherapy, because they're going to put these little tiny seeds of radioactive iodine into the organ. They're going to inject it into the organ. So your prostate has to be a certain size. So I went in, had the prostate measured with the CAT scan. It was good. It was fine. We were ready to go. Now, the old way of doing things, and the way it's done in many other places, is they use the image from the CAT scan, and they go in through your butt with these needles, and they stick these seeds, these radioactive iodine seeds about the size of a grain of rice. They stick them in using the image off that CAT scan to try to determine the size of your prostate and where the seed should go. The problem is, between the time you get the CAT scan and the time you get the implants, your prostate might have shifted, it might have inflamed, it might have shrunk, something might have happened to it. So what Dr. Hussain does, and this is the technique that he developed himself and is now in use in many places around the world, is he gets an imager and he gets a live picture of it. So I don't know how he does it because I was knocked out, but somehow or other he puts a probe in there that takes an image of your prostate so he can look at it as he is implanting the seeds. So he's getting a live look at the prostate rather than looking from an image that was taken days or weeks earlier. And with that, he implanted 88 seeds into my prostate, rice-sized seeds. Iodine 125. It's a radioactive material. It has a half-life of 20 months, okay? So by 20 months, the radiation is gone. So for those 20 months, there's active radiation within your body, but it only extends about 5 millimeters outside the prostate, which is a good thing for many reasons. You don't want to walk around radioactive, right? You don't want to have to stay away from other people. But the other reason why it's a good thing that it extends the 5 millimeters is if that cancer spread from your prostate toward the capsule, the radiation would also get that, okay? It doesn't go any farther than that, and if your cancer had spread from the prostate beyond the capsule anyway, you're in much more serious trouble, and you're going to have other things done. So that's sort of how brachytherapy works. It's a day surgery. You go in the morning. I was there probably from about 9 to 5:30, and I went home that night. I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. Before I move on with my own procedure, I'm going to digress a bit. These numbers I'm going to give you might be outdated. They were given to me by Dr. Hussain 2 years ago at one of my checkups. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope that things have improved. But only 100 men per year in Calgary receive brachytherapy. Out of all those diagnosed with prostate cancer, just 100 men receive it. It's partly because not everybody's eligible. Their prostates might be the wrong size, or there may be other reasons why they can't have the procedure done. But the main reason is funding. And to be selected one of those 100 men to get brachytherapy, as far as I'm concerned, because the treatment was so wonderful for me, is like winning the lottery, okay? I feel very, very lucky and grateful that I was eligible for that treatment, that I got that treatment, and that I got that treatment done by Dr. Hussain. The procedures are done on Tuesdays. They're done 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. Not 1 o'clock. I'm saying there's one procedure done in the morning and one procedure done in the afternoon. I'm told that in Calgary, as I mentioned, 100 men are treated with this every year. In Kelowna, a city less than a tenth the size of Calgary, they do 200 men per year in Kelowna because they have more funding there. It is my view, after what I've gone through, and of course you have different experiences than me, but it's my view that brachytherapy should be the default treatment, with surgery being an option for those who don't qualify for brachy. Not the other way around. Surgery is now the default treatment. And again, this opinion is based on my own experience. I'm not a medical expert. I might be like totally out there, but that's just my thought. All right, so as I mentioned, they do the treatments, one in the morning, one of them in the afternoon. I was the afternoon patient on February 26, 2013. You go to the McKeag Tower at Foothills Hospital. Get admitted, you're sent up to day surgery on the 6th floor. I was escorted past a long line of patients waiting for their surgeries into a private room with a private bathroom. I must be a big TV star. No. You get the private room because of what they're going to do to you. They're going to implant you with radioactive seeds into your prostate. And when you come back from the operating room, you have to be isolated from other people. That's why you get the private room. You can't have anybody around you for the first few hours. So after a couple of hours of preparation and waiting, I was taken from the McKeag Tower to the operating room, which is in the Tom Baker building. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Foothills Hospital layout, but the McKeag Tower is way over there, and the Tom Baker is way over there. It is a very long gurney ride through tunnels in the basement from one to the other. So we got to the operating room. My wife was with me until the procedure actually began. You go in there. There are 4 or 5 doctors, nurses, assistants ready to go, an anesthetist, anesthesiologist, whatever you call that guy, he was there too. And the bed that I was to lie on kind of reminded me of the one my wife was on when she gave birth. You lie in the bed and you put your feet in stirrups, and there you go for all to see. Yeah, it was kind of awkward. So before the procedure began, before they put me under, they said, "Do you have any questions?" And I was asked probably half a dozen times, "Do you have any questions?" "No, I have no questions. No, I have no." "Okay, I got a question. If you want me to ask a question, I'll ask a question." So I looked at Dr. Hussein and I said, "You're not drunk, are you?" And he said no, he wasn't drunk. So we began. And at that point, I didn't have much to do with it. From then on in, they said, "Count to 5, 5, 4, 3. And that was it. Procedure lasted about 90 minutes. I woke in the recovery room, had absolutely no sense of any time having passed. And then I was taken on that long gurney ride through the tunnels again, back to the room in the McKeag Tower, that private room with the private bathroom. And I stayed there until about 5 o'clock because it didn't feel quite right. And they want you to make sure you can use the toilet before you leave. And you don't really use the toilet because there's a catheter in there, and they just want you to fill the bag, and it's kind of disgusting. And you know what? Maybe I was wrong when I said that the biopsy was the most uncomfortable thing. It's the catheter. And having the catheter removed the next day, I had to go back there the next day, the next morning, to have this thing removed. I'll spare you the details, but it didn't work the first time. Didn't work the second time or the third time. This male nurse, about half my age, was trying to remove it, and I don't think he's ever going to forget that ordeal either. It was the most painful thing I've ever had in my life. And I sure hope I never run into that guy in a grocery store or whatever. So catheter's out, I leave the hospital, I've got 88 of these little seeds in my prostate, iodine 125, each emitting radiation intended to kill the cancer cells over time. And the cancer cells are killed pretty quickly, and then the iodine is still radioactive, so it does kill some of the healthy cells as well. And what you end up with is basically a radiated, useless organ when it's all over, because pretty much the entire prostate is killed. It's still in there, but it's useless. And your PSA doesn't really drop to 0 right away. Because the iodine kills the cancer over time, your PSA at first very gradually drops. And the important thing is that it drops. And then, what was it? After maybe a year, it just fell all the way down to near zero. And it's been at near zero ever since. I was getting checked up every 3 months. It went to every 6 months, and now it's every year I get tested, and it is negligible. You can't, it's undetectable. Hopefully it will stay that way. Now there's some guys go through something called a bounce, the PSA bounce. 2 years after you get brachytherapy, your PSA could rise, and if it does, it's not anything to worry about unless it rises 3 checkups in a row, then it is something to worry about. Mine never did go through that bounce. Kind of happy about that, because if it did, I'd still be nervous, even though they tell me it's nothing to worry about. Right after the procedure, I'm told not to have small children on my lap for a few weeks. I'm told not to ride a bicycle for several months. I'm told that if I go to the airport or try to cross the border into the United States, people with guns are going to come after me because the radiation detectors have detected radiation. I was told a story by Dr. Hussein that the guy crossed the border in southern Alberta by car. And even before he got to the window where you declare whatever it is you declare, there were guys with guns pointed at his car rushing up to see why there's radiation coming from his vehicle. So they warned me that, and they gave me a little blue card to show the police if that ever happens. And after 20 months, I was told to throw out the blue card. I still have it. It's in my wallet right now as a souvenir, but I don't really need it anymore because the radiation is all gone. But during that time, I never did travel internationally. I just didn't want to go through all that. I didn't need to travel internationally. Why bother? But I did go on road trips. And the first one was to BC just a few months after the procedure. Now, I never really, they tell you that after you get brachytherapy, you're going to feel burning every time you use the bathroom, and that sure happened. That happened for a long time. You could feel urgency. You got to go to the bathroom now, right now. And frequency. Urgency was never really a problem for me. Dr. Hussein said he would watch me on the TV to see if I suddenly had to run off the screen without explanation. That was never really a problem for me, but frequency was. And the worst night I think I had was about 6, 7 months after the procedure, and I was up every half hour. And that just, that got a little ridiculous. So I phoned the prostate cancer office, or the brachytherapy office, I should say, and they had prescribed Flomax to me when I left the hospital. And so they doubled the dose. And that kind of took care of that. And eventually, a few months later, as everything got better, I was able to wean myself off of Flomax. But yes, we did take road trips. And the first road trip was just a few months after the procedure. I was still experiencing the frequency issue. So we went on the highway and we got as far as that casino at the Kananaskis turnoff. And then we got to Lake Louise. Gas station there. Then that tourist information place at Field. Then the subway in Golden. Then the hotel on top of Rogers Pass. It was still open then. Then at Tim Hortons in Revelstoke. And for some reason, after Revelstoke, we finally managed to complete the trip to Kelowna nonstop. I don't know how that happened, but it was just one of those things. It's funny the things you do remember. The burning sensation that I talked about. It went on for quite a few months. Quite often it goes away 6 to 8 weeks after the procedure. It probably went on for 6 months for me. And I, again, kept being told that not to worry about it. This is unusual, but it's not a bad thing. And eventually it did go away for a while, and it came back. And even now, I expect it will come back again. When it comes back now, it comes back for maybe a week and then goes away for several months and comes back. And this is kind of the problem with radiation. The side effects can go on and on and on. And that is happening with me. I had a fairly, at least what I thought was kind of a scary side effect last July, which was more than 2 years after the procedure. It involved some blood. And again, I called, and they said, don't worry about it. It'll go away in a couple of weeks. But if it doesn't, call us back. It did. And in my last meeting with Dr. Hussein, he told me, it's nothing to worry about. But it's scary. And you know, I also have to tell you, maybe the scariest thing was up here in my mind, because you're always worried that the prostate cancer might have spread somewhere else. I have a desk at home. I do most of my work actually at home. I don't go into the television station until late afternoon just before I go on the air. I do most of my preparation at home. And I had a desk. I'm going to just sit at this chair here and raise my voice because there's no microphone now. And the computer was on the floor, okay? And I would lean over to turn the computer on. My rib is pressing against the armchair. And my rib got painful. And I heard that when prostate cancer spreads, it often spreads to the ribs. That scared the daylights out of me until I realized what was going on. I didn't say anything. It was just in my head, kind of torturing me a little bit. And then I leaned over in my chair one day, and the arm of the chair hit my ribs exactly where the pain was. I thought, maybe that's why. So I moved the computer to another spot. I don't lean over anymore. The rib pain is gone. Good thing. But that was probably one of the scariest things that has happened since the procedure. Most days now I feel normal again, but every day I think of it. Not a day goes by when I don't think of prostate cancer, and not a day goes by when I don't think of the people who have prostate cancer who had it a lot worse than I do, who had a more invasive procedure, who had much more serious side effects. I consider myself to be very lucky. A bit of burning when I pee, no big deal compared to what some other people are going through. Now, as I mentioned before, I kept it a secret for 2.5 years, but being somewhat of a public figure, I knew that the day would have to come when I made it public, and I did whatever I could to raise awareness and help other people out. The reason why I kept it secret, I told only my wife and my sister. I didn't tell my children right away because I was diagnosed before Christmas. And I didn't want them to go through Christmas knowing this kind of thing. So I kept it secret until 2 days before my February day and Tuesday, in which I was to go into the hospital. So I told them on the Sunday before that. And their reaction was expected. A lot of tears, because they didn't know any more than I did about prostate cancer. You hear the word cancer, and it's scary. They didn't know how treatable it was. They're teenagers. They had to talk to people about it. They had to talk to their friends. So I told them, yeah, it's okay if you talk to your closest friends at school, but this shouldn't become public knowledge. Not yet. I had 2 jobs at the time. I told both of my bosses. They were very supportive. When I went for the biopsy, I told my coworkers that I was leaving just to undergo an uncomfortable medical procedure. Didn't tell them what it was. I had the procedure on a Tuesday, took the remainder of the week off work, told my coworkers I was using up holiday time when I was really in for brachytherapy. They didn't know. When I came back to work, put on the brave face, tried to act as normally as I could, kept it a secret. So at the end of February, after I had the procedure, only my doctors, my wife, my sister, her family, and a bunch of kids at Lord Beaverbrook High School knew about it. But there was one family member who was not told and who was never going to know, and that's why I kept it secret, and that person was my mother. She was in her 90s. She was quite frail. My sister had just gone through a very serious bout with cancer, and it caused my mother a lot of worry. She was a very active person for her age, but during that time, when my sister went through her cancer, in which she did lose weight, did lose her hair, and went through the whole thing, she aged so fast. So my sister came right out of it, and then I was diagnosed. And for her to know about my diagnosis would probably have killed her. So I didn't tell her, and I didn't tell anybody else, because if I told other people, having the job that I had, it might become public and it would get back to her, and I didn't want that to happen. So 2.5 years later, my mother passed away. She never knew, and that's the way I wanted it. But now, everyone does. I went public in the fall. I participated in Movember, and sorry to hear tonight that you guys don't get any of their money, but I did participate in it. I had a mustache for 30 years. On October 30th, I shaved it off so I could regrow it in the month of November. I raised personally about $14,000. My team raised about $19,000, almost $20,000, and that put us in 19th place in the whole country. Pretty proud of that. I hadn't seen myself without a mustache for 30 years. My kids had never seen me without one, neither had my wife. But the reaction was so positive that when Movember was over, I decided to shave it off, maybe for good. We'll see. So here we are almost 3 years later. My PSA went down slowly at first, but now it's undetectable. I still have a few side effects from time to time. There may be more still to come, and there may be some serious ones still to come. Again, with surgery, all the suffering happens right at the outset, and then things get better over time. With radiation, there's little pain, little suffering, but there is a risk of more side effects years later. And all I can do is hope that doesn't happen. So far, so good, but it is something I think about every day. It's not something that gets me down, because every day when I wake up, get out of bed, and I feel good, I'm happy about that. Now, I just want to end with a little bit more of a commentary on those studies that recommend against routine PSA screening for prostate cancer. I think it should be the opposite. There should be more and not less. I know I'm speaking to the choir, singing to the choir, preaching to the choir, whatever the saying is, but if I hadn't been screened, I might be a very sick man today. Because remember, I had those little cells. I didn't have a tumor. You couldn't feel anything in there. It was the PSA testing that discovered it. All those little cancer cells might have congealed or coalesced or whatever, gathered into a big tumor, and by the time it was found, it might have been too late. I'm convinced that PSA screening saved my life, and I was 52 years old. Pretty young for this. Who would think? So without the PSA screening, my situation likely would have been overlooked. 70%, as I mentioned, of people sent for biopsies in Calgary test negative. But isn't it better to go through the discomfort of a biopsy and test negative and find out you don't have cancer rather than not be tested and have that disease grow inside you and find out only after it's too late? It doesn't make sense to me. I don't get their argument, and based on my own experience, I never will. That's it. I'm done.
Thank you, David. This is a bit of a real treat to not often do we hear about the personal anecdotes and stories, although I know we all have them. But it's very enlightening to hear yours. David's going to be here a few more minutes, so he'll take questions if there's anyone wants to ask him.
Any family members have prostate cancer? Uncles, father?
No,
You don't have a brother?
I don't have a brother, no. There is cancer in the family, but it's not prostate cancer. I have one sister. She had the cancer, as I mentioned. My mother had leukemia, and my father had bowel cancer. So each closest member of my blood family has had some form of cancer. Different. Each one was different.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you recall how high your PSA got pre-op?
It was in the 4s, 4.1 or 4.2.
I think most of us are envious of that number.
Well, yes. My family doctor, he said it's not the number that's concerning him, it's the trend. I went from 2 to 3 to 4 point something in a fairly short time. And that's what got him suspicious. Yeah.
In my family, 4 of us have prostate problems. One brother of mine, he had also brachytherapy.
Right?
And he's recuperating from it. But the most comical thing is what's chronic. The most annoying thing for him, he says, each time he urinates, his fingers tingle.
Oh, really?
And nobody knows, and they cannot explain why.
Wow. Yeah.
I myself had prostate problem. I had brachytherapy. Yeah. Cryo treatment.
Right.
17 years ago.
And you're doing well, obviously, yeah.
Any other questions? Josephine?
I just like to bring up 2 points, and thank you so much for sharing your story with us. My husband also went to Dr. Hussein and had his brachytherapy, and very thankful we call that remission, that his PSA has been very low now, 0.4 for 1 year or something.
Yep.
And when you mentioned that, it's always in your thought, and it is a lifetime journey that we're going through, and that's why I find that with this organization, even though honestly for myself and my husband, we feel we're fine, we don't need anything, but we think if we are in this group, then we can be like a family, a community supporting each other who may be going through another active phase requiring treatment or something. So I'm so thankful that you speak up because you are a public figure, and that really encouraged more people to say, hey, if you don't think you need support, but maybe you can come and support the rest of the people. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And the second thing is, I have a little experience directly with Prostate Cancer Canada regarding the Movember event. Movember, as Ron Singer, Mr. Ron Singer is saying, is actually an independent organization, but it's global organization, not just within Canada. And so it raises funds throughout the world. And so that fund, including what we raise in Canada and in Calgary, goes to that organization. And then from that organization, they decide how much portion go to which country. And so for the funding that would go to Canada, they would distribute it through Prostate Cancer Canada. So then in that organization, they set up a panel, including all the different specialists, okay? And then it is mainly for research. And it's research not just for prostate, okay? It is really just, it is for men's health, all sort of men's health, including mental health, testicular cancer, not just limited to prostate cancer. But then through Prostate Cancer Canada, then they are being determined, they would be given how much money to distribute among the different cities, okay? And then different cities then would have their university or researchers submitting their projects and ideas to them. And then their panel, all set up, would include one member from the community, somebody from the East Coast, somebody from the West Coast, somebody from the Central. And so I was lucky enough to be a representative, all together with my husband, Louis, to be the representative for Western Canada. And so we would sit at the panel and then reveal all the different submissions of projects. And then the scientists and expertise would evaluate, the technicality of it, and a lot of the terminology is really way beyond me. But then from a community standpoint, do we think those research projects are really relevant and beneficial for us? And so then we have a little bit of input for that. So I want you to be aware of that. Our local organization is really a local voice for Calgary. So we participate in their fundraising, and which I also encourage you to, but I also want to make it very clear that we are completely separate from that organization. We support them, but we have to do our own fundraising in order to be a support group for our local people. So if you have any doubts about how we are linked together, don't hesitate to ask. And probably Steve, our past president can even explain better than I do.
You did a wonderful job.
So we really appreciate all the members here supporting each other and supporting our organization. And thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
David, I'm amazed that you were able to hold back that secret from your fellow workers.
Yeah.
I'm really amazed, and it was the opposite for me. I was a member of City Council.
I recall.
And I had to make that decision, and I just couldn't hold it, and
Yeah.
couldn't hold back, and decided to share it with the public, and it became well known, of course. But I'm interested in your European problem because I have that problem. And I
Did you
think
have brachytherapy?
Many of us have that problem.
Did you have brachytherapy?
No.
No?
I
Okay.
had the
Surgery?
but I can certainly relate to your trip west to Columbus and trying to find some spot to go.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happens. And so now I'll be watching you and hoping that you won't.
Well, I'm happy to tell you that was shortly after the procedure. Now I can make it to Lake Louise. I don't have to stop at that casino.
I'm just wondering if one of these days all of a sudden you say, more rain, more rain.
I hope so, but not for that reason.
Just a minor thing, but it's something because you're in a position to influence people. You may want to share this. I was foolish. I had doctors die on me, and I had to change my doctors and all this. So there wasn't a consistency with the digital exam.
Right.
I had always had the PSA. And I'm really sorry that I didn't insist on getting the digital. I wasn't afraid of it or anything, just it's yucky and you don't want to do it,
Yeah.
right? So I hadn't had the digital for some time, and my PSA decided to go up a ladder. And I saw Dr. Metcalf, and he did the digital and said he found something, and then I went for the biopsy. So the word that I'm sharing with the crowd and yourself is insist when someone's going to the doctor, they get both. Get the PSA and get the digital. So I've heard stories of people getting the digital and it's nothing,
Yeah.
as I think you said, and then they get the PSA and it starts to climb, and then it's the other way around. Let them do both. It's still not a guarantee of anything, but at least it can detect a situation that needs some attention.
Yeah, I'm very grateful my doctor is like that. He did that ever since I was in my mid-30s. He did both tests. And when nothing showed up with the finger, the PSA was the reason that I was diagnosed.
Just as a quick note, my PSA started to go through the roof. My GP did the digital exam, didn't find anything, so we retested to make sure that it wasn't a false result on the PSA. It had grown a little bit more, and I can't tell you guys how thankful I was to the Cancer Center over at Rocky View. They shot me through a cannon, guys. I've got help in a real bed hurry, so I'm about a week away from the end of my radiation therapy. I'm hoping I'm joining you guys as a recovery guys. So don't just rely on your GP. If something smells bad, talk to the guys that know.
Yeah, you got to advocate for yourself, absolutely.
David, I have one question, and I still have my prostate, but I was almost like you, that it had gone outside into the lymph nodes. So the original radiation they were going to do, they couldn't do. So I have been on the hormone treatment since, and I've been on that now for 5 years. But I can remember going in and getting that diagnosis after the biopsy. And I was just absolutely stunned. I had no idea how it worked, how extreme it was. Just the big letter C.
Yeah.
And my doctor said, "Oh, don't worry about it. Some of them will live 10 years." I said, "I'm only 69 now, and my goal is 120. As good as 10, 40 years. So, at any rate, for the first couple of years, it was working in getting bits of information here and there, and, you know, I'm just still not knowing much about what I had and what was being treated. And by luck, I was introduced to Prostate Calgary. I come in, I joined the Warriors group. I've been with them now for about 2 years, 3 years. Best thing I ever did. And as I say, I was just in the wilderness. And this group, talking with and hearing from all number of people that had different procedures, that, oh, my PSA 65 wasn't all that bad. At the time, they just said, oh, 65, we've got to do something. And I thought, well, what happened if it went up to 66? Would that be into the ground? So, I mean, with our group, we've had fellows in there that are over 200 PSA.
Yep.
And right back down to my friend Wes here, undetectable for a good long while. And we just cheer them. But I was wondering, with your story, you seem to be carrying that whole weight yourself, not sharing.
Yeah.
Was there any time that you got into a group that could help you?
No, there wasn't. Oddly enough, I wasn't afraid of this. I had confidence in Dr. Hussein. I had confidence in Dr. Metcalf. And when they told me that this was highly treatable, that you'll go through some discomfort, you will have a few, what I consider to be very minor side effects, that was very reassuring to me. So because those doctors were so wonderful and they were so reassuring, I never really became afraid once they talked to me. Now, as I said, when I got that phone call first and I trembled for 2 hours, I was scared to death, right? But those doctors reassured me to the point where I was no longer afraid of the treatment. I was no longer afraid of the outcome. And when Dr. Hussein told me, you know, he's done 1,000 procedures and his success rate is 98%, it's good enough for me, you know? So it wasn't that hard to hold it in. But just because I say I wasn't afraid doesn't mean I wasn't concerned. Of course there's a concern. And even as I said, to this day, I still think about it every single day. But I wasn't really afraid after I talked to the doctors. So it wasn't hard to hold it in. And by the same token, while it wasn't hard to hold it in, it was a relief when I was able to talk about it and when I did. So it might have been a bit more of a stressor on me than I realized at the time because of the relief I experienced when I did finally talk about it.
David, when you talked about your leaning against the arm on the chair,
yes,
you were afraid
yes,
maybe you had cancer inside the ribs,
yes,
in the bones. Well, I don't know if you all know that, but if you go and have a bone scan, it will detect if the cancer has traveled outside the prostate. Just want to add that.
Yeah, I was, to be honest with you, I was kind of, I'm a guy. And so we put those kinds of things off. So I was trying to find out what other possible reason there might have been, which is why I moved the computer to the other side. Once I figured out that might be the reason for it. If the pain had persisted past that point, I definitely would have gone for the bone scan. Because, yeah, that did make me a little afraid. There's no question about that. I was afraid of that. But of the procedure itself, I wasn't. I was fully confident in what Dr. Hussein could do for me. But if the cancer had spread to the ribs or wherever else, that was something Dr. Hussein didn't know about either. And it wouldn't form part of his treatment. So I knew that his treatment would be successful, but if there was any kind of a spread, then there would be more trouble down the road.
Just a comment, like you, my first contact with a urologist was Dr. Metcalf.
Yeah.
And I explored with him alternative courses of treatment. Brachytherapy, no. Cryotherapy, no. Radiation, not surgery.
Right.
Of course, he's a surgeon.
Yes.
So I had surgery
Yes.
in 2003. Now, my PSA was 11, my Gleason was 8.
Right.
So he didn't, and my PSA today is undetectable.
Excellent.
So-
Excellent.
No. Dave?
David, how has your wife survived your cancer scare and treatment?
You know, she was really, really good. I think my own confidence in the prospect for successful treatment rubbed off on her. So yeah, she was worried, but not to the point where it was disruptive. You know, it wasn't, it was a concern, but it wasn't something that kept her awake at night. It wasn't something that she had to go and, you know, talk to people about for a cathartic release or anything like that. There was concern, but she was probably as confident as I was that the treatment would work, that it would be successful. So she did well. Yeah. The kids, not so much, but she did really, really well. I just want to make another point based on what we've been talking about here. As I mentioned, I didn't know. All I knew it was cancer. I didn't know how treatable it was initially at first. I didn't know if I was going to have to go through chemotherapy and that whole horrible thing that so many other people have to go through. And I was treated very successfully. I was treated very quickly. The side effects have been minimal. It's been absolutely fantastic. And I do worry about what's ahead. I do worry about if there's going to be more side effects from the radiation. I do worry that, is it going to come back? It does come back in some of these patients. At the same time, it kind of upsets me when people say, even though I know that other cancer patients go through a lot worse than I did, it still kind of upsets me when people say something like, oh, you got the good kind of cancer. You got the good kind of cancer. They can take care of that just like that. Yeah, they can, but is there such a thing as a good kind of cancer? And what if I didn't get the PSA tests? What if it was still growing inside me right now and I didn't know about it? And next thing you know, 6 months down the road, I'm in the hospital and it's spread throughout my body. Don't tell me it's a good kind of cancer, okay? That's all.
David, thank you.
Thank you.